Now it is. Yes. So we are our topic for this evening is student personal devices, and I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Balderas to start the meeting.
Yeah, so thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to the team here shortly, but they'll provide you the update what we did last year in terms of the slow rollout of this, and then the executive order came out and that had us tweak it a little bit, but went over to Dr. Reggiani and the staff.
Thank you, Dr. Balderas. Thank you so much, Chair Garg, and our esteemed directors. Thank you for your time this evening. We're happy to be presenting with you this evening. I'm Dr. Shelley Reggiani, Teaching and Learning Associate Superintendent, and with me tonight I have Todd Corsetti High School Executive Director and Robin Kombrowski, Pre-K-8 Executive Director. This evening, we have the opportunity to share with you a little bit about the governor's executive order that came out this summer. We're going to be talking about the changes in the district rules that are in response to the executive order. We're also going to be previewing the policy. And then we're going to be sharing the communication plan and the implementation supports for each of our schools. Governor Kotek earlier this summer required all schools to ban K-12 cell phones and personal devices beginning January 1st, 2026. It's frequently referred to as a cell phone ban. However, it does go into personal devices such as smartwatches, things of that nature as well. The idea being that districts would have the first half of the year to start planning for implementation. Her goal, as she wrote in her executive order, was to improve the mental health of students, the focus, the learning, the interactions and social interactions with other students and with staff, and providing an ability for schools to have some flexibility and some support from the Department of Education. As you know, we had a cell phone policy implemented this last year, and so we didn't need the run-up time that the law afforded. I'm going to turn it over to Todd to walk us through the next portion of where we are.
Thank you, Dr. Reggiani. Thank you, school board. You'll remember that we sat here, I think it was April of last year, and we talked about the work we had done with our focus groups, and Robin's going to speak more about the work that got us to the point last spring where we decided upon an implementation that really would be layered based on the student level. So by and large at K-8, cell phones and electronic devices were not able to be out. They were either in a student's locker or in a backpack. At the high school level, we piloted last year the idea of pack it or park it, which was very successful. So students were able to use their phones during passing time and at lunch, but during the school class periods, they were either to be packed in their backpack or parked in a cubby or kind of a shoe box, basically, for their phones. We had great success with that, so that was the proposed implementation for this year. And then, as Dr. Reggiani mentioned, the governor came out in July with a new order that required bell-to-bell ban of cell phones at the high school level as well. So it was actually a pretty easy pivot for us to make because the lion's share of the work was done last year around instructional minutes and making sure kids didn't have their devices out during class. So the pivot was minor to say, well, guess what now, guys? You can't have them out at all unless it is before school or after school, or you have a 504 or an IEP or some other designation that allows you that. And so it was, for us, big X in last year's policy. And this year, we still remain with pack it or park it, but what we've added is the idea of bell to bell. So that students, once the bell rings at the beginning of the day, their phone either needs to be in their backpack or in their locker. It's not supposed to be on their person. However, as you can imagine, that's pretty hard to track at the high school level in particular. They can have the phone before or after school, but they can't have it during passing time. They can't have it during lunch. There was a great deal of concern, as you can imagine, in particular at the high school level and the options level. How are we going to supervise this with, at a Westview, you might have 1,200 kids at lunch with 8 people supervising. So how are we going to supervise this? It came with a lot of communication, and actually the kids have been very, very responsive. These first 2 weeks, the schools are reporting that it's taken a couple gentle reminders, but by and large, it hasn't been the issue that they were concerned that it would be. And so we feel pretty good about where we are as a system, K-12. Again, the elementary and middle school is less of an adjustment. For the high school kids, it has been an adjustment. But I think with the help of our communication plan, our staff that are emphasizing it, and also just being humane in how we address this for kids during their unsupervised time, it's been successful. We're going to review it tomorrow. We have a principals meeting. We also have Dr. Balderas' student superintendent council, and we're going to talk about how's it going for our students. We're looking to add members to the board as we did last year, so I'm sure you'll have an opportunity to talk to 4 students about that as well. So when you look at what the executive order required, it was a review of the order, which we've done. We engaged with our constituents last year. We had a lot of information, so we felt like we didn't need to go back to the community for that this fall, which allowed us to implement this from day 1 of school starting. And we shared with the community what our plan is and has been, and we'll continue to monitor and adjust. Robin.
Clicker. Good evening. So I'm going to share the information that we reviewed with you in the spring about the work that we did through our process prior to the governor's order, so that you have a sense of the work that went into our process and the engagement we had from our constituents, which, as you saw, is an expectation from the governor. Thankfully, we did much of that work in our process last year and had the opportunity to engage really with every stakeholder group. And that has proven to be hugely helpful in the rollout that we're doing this year, and will support the implementation of the governor's order. So as Todd shared, the focus really for us started last year on student health and well-being. And as you know, this is foundational in our strategic plan, the opportunity to really ensure students' safety and the ability to thrive socially and emotionally, and that every student feels a strong sense of belonging in our schools. And what research was showing us at that time, and for a period of time, has been that devices are having an impact on that. And so that really was a driving focus of our process internally as we dug into this work. Of course, the equity lens provided, the lens through which we made all of our decisions. And so we continued to ensure that as we were engaging in the process, that we were looking at the voices that were included. And we went to great lengths to ensure that we heard from a widespread of students and staff and community members. We asked each school to host sessions so that we had feedback. And that made a significant difference in just the sheer volume of input that we had in our process, and helped guide what we shared with you last spring. The purpose in our work really was about creating a focused, distraction-free learning environment. That was our goal. And we knew that it had been rumored that there would be something coming from the governor, and we felt it was important for us to start that work because of the urgency we were hearing around this topic. And so we really focused on mental health well-being, as I shared. We were looking at how do we ensure that our students have an opportunity for strong peer and student-teacher interactions every day in their classrooms, in the lunchrooms, which, by the way, are much louder now, and we're really happy about that. The opportunity to keep students engaged, focused, and challenged. And then, the importance of staying updated on research. And so that the research became part of the work we were doing, and understanding what research is thankfully now telling us about the impact on electronic devices on the learning environments and guiding best practice. So we knew that we were going to be able to implement a process and eventually a policy that would support that work. This was the feedback that we shared with you last spring, some of the key themes that emerged as we listened to students, staff, and families. All of that took place over last fall and winter as we studied then and formed our policy and our process based on these key points of feedback. And as Todd shared, while the executive order has stipulated the bell-to-bell policy, our practices are really supporting, are still grounded in the idea of focusing on student learning, self-advocacy, safety, and connection. Those remain still true in the work that we're doing alongside the governor's order. Many times we get questions around what happens when it doesn't go well. And so the question about what the non-compliance looks like and what the expectations are, we've made sure that our code of conduct expectations are aligned in our technology misuse area of the student code of conduct, and our responses and expectations are in line with what the governor has outlined as well. For implementation, we spent a good portion last year in implementing our sort of what we called our stopgap approach last year. We spent a lot of time in communication and being really clear with students and families about what this was going to look like, and that has happened again this year. That administrators and teachers right now are doing a great deal of communicating with our students and our families about the expectations. And so the implementation work is largely coming from teachers, staff, and administrators, and that school administration is providing regular communication to our families about these expectations, and, explaining what happens when there is noncompliance and just being clear about the why we're doing the work. And so that's, as you can see, there's also, the governor's order includes really specific provisions that must be in board policy. And so a recommended update to board policy will be presented as a separate agenda item.
And with that, thank you, and please let us know if you have any questions, and we would be happy to answer.
Any questions? Director Kassim?
Thank you for that. I had a chance to go back and look at what was presented early in the spring, so it was really helpful as a refresher. Thank you for all the work you did, kind of, again, starting there, getting the type of engagement that's necessary. I think my question was really about looking forward. I know you mentioned, right, like there's a meeting with principals, and based on what we have heard so far, all of that, I'd love to know if there is either a plan to or a mechanism in place for us to do some tracking around this in terms of like what kind of, if there are incidents or things that happen, because I think, again, from an implementation, like if there are exceptions that come up where the school staff like makes the call, which makes a lot of sense, like, right, like if we are tracking that to say, here's what happened, and in this case, we made the exception and across the district, because I think, again, especially when there is an executive order and something kind of comes top down, even though we are fortunate because we have done the work ground up by engaging with the community, it is a little bit of a shift and change, and could, again, be received as a little heavy-handed. And I would love for us to be mindful in terms of how can we continue to advocate, engage meaningfully, and I think being able to reflect back as we continue to inform and enforce these policies to say, here is how it happened midway this year or at the end of the year, like what did we learn and how can we either tweak or adapt within the framework or the guardrails or guidelines there.
Thank you for that. One of the things that is important to know that with our student behavioral code of conduct, there is a way for us to track if there are pinch points with students who are struggling with compliance. And to Robin's point, our emphasis is on student well-being and connection. Compliance comes along with that. but we're starting with that connection. So you'll see staff in the hallways as our students are entering the building, welcoming them, saying good morning. If a student has their cell phone out, it's an opportunity to say, hey, don't forget to park it, don't forget to pack it. And they do. So most of this is about culture setting. And because we started so well last year in creating that culture, this is a small shift. We're one of the districts that is very fortunate that this is a small shift in culture for us. And mostly impacting only our options in our high school programs with the change, because the park it and pack it was the same for our elementary and middle schools. On that larger scale, to your point, of tracking and then communicating and how do we look at this, I know that Dr. Balderas is involved with a number of organizations, and one of them being with our superintendents across the state, meeting regularly where these types of conversations come up. I know that they discuss it, and I know that our association also is listening for what are the pinch points that they need to be bringing back and advocating to our legislatures and to our governor, et cetera, so that they can keep tabs on it. But I'll come back to, for us, it's culture setting, and we've been very fortunate that we're focused on the relationships, and the compliance comes along with that. We're going to have pinch points. I would imagine that is going to happen on occasion, but our focus is going to continue to be on building that relationship with kids and families.
Thank you.
Dr. Carpenter?
Thank you. I have sort of a follow-on to Director Qasim's question. And I think this applies to a lot of programs that we implement, and we have all of our equity goals, and we kind of name the strategic goals that are associated with the changes we're implementing. And I guess my curiosity after serving for a couple of years, as I've seen new things roll out, is do we revisit that? Do we revisit our implementation? Did our implementation meet those goals that we'd set for ourselves? And I'm thinking about this with the Bell schedules and some of the changes to the middle school curriculum, and a lot of these things that we had a lot of initial pushback on. And people do get used to stuff, students and families and teachers. So, so I get that. And, is it just like people kind of quietly just get on and move on? And did we meet the goals that we were hoping to meet with those changes? So as we look at the cell phone, you kind of laid out the strategic goals that are a part of what we're thinking when we're implementing this rule that is required. We actually don't have any wiggle room. Could we be more draconian? Maybe. They're not allowed to, it's possible. But I would love to have us do a look back, survey our students, our families, our teachers. Are we meeting these goals? And is that information, I'd love to share that information with the community and the governor. It's probably, I do think in the end, this is going to be great for everyone. But we don't know unless we actually look at it. So I would love for us to be able to, you can bring back to the board something ahead of the short session. Do we really think that the legislators are going to have time in the short session to actually do this? I don't know, but if we would be able to present some data for them to wrestle with, that might be helpful. So, that's my curiosity is, can data be brought back to the board on this policy, and if it's achieving its goals, and would that then be helpful information to share with the state lawmakers? Thank you. Oh, sorry, one more. Sorry,
Dr. Potter.
I made one more note that I forgot to ask, sorry. And then my curiosity that before we first implemented, I heard from a lot of parents in particular that were really upset. They did not want this policy to be enacted, and I get that. And I do know, aside from students with 504s and IEPs, that there might be other cultural needs surrounding cell phone policy. So has there been any input from the Equity Advisory Committee? Can we bring that question to them to say, what groups are we not thinking of that might have a different relationship with the phone, with family, whatever it is? I would love to have their input as well.
And they were part of the initial. So I appreciate Todd had raised that our student advisory was a part of it. So was our equity advisory. They were actually one of our first groups, and we went through and did the engagement process with them twofold. Number one, to have their input, and two, to ask those questions about the approach that we are using to make sure that it's culturally congruent when we're crossing into different cultural communities, et cetera, and hearing from them as a cross-section of the district to listen and to be sure that our approach was going to be that congruence that we needed to hear our community. And so they advised, and we were able to make some adjustments and then hone in and listen how we're structuring, for example, how we structured last year the engagement sessions that principals did, doing them in a community's first language. And oftentimes that wasn't English. And then what is our process for translation so that everybody has the opportunity to respond in the language of their choosing, and then everybody being able to see it in a language that of their choosing. So that was incredibly helpful. Thank you for that. They were
Excellent, and I hope they can be included if we are able to do this look back.
Yes.
Include the Equity Advisory Committee. Thank you for letting me finish,
No,
Chair
that's
Gard.
great. Dr. Potter?
Thank you. And I don't have a question necessarily, but it's more of a comment about, I am imagining, even though it's a small pivot for the high schools and the option schools, I imagine there's some frustration because everybody had a plan, right? You left the school year, you had a plan, you probably had the posters printed, maybe just a little, because there was so much thought. Every piece of this process as we implement something that has a big impact in how students engage with our schools, and personal devices are big. The team had done such a thoughtful job in all of those steps. And so to pivot, although small, I imagine there's a little bit of frustration. And as a parent, what I noticed is an absolute professional, positive implementation. The focus in all the communication I have seen as a parent has been about learning, it's been about health, it's been about we're going to make the most of this and the best of it. So it hasn't been, anyway, there could have been a much way to implement it, and I haven't seen that or felt that as a family or as a parent. So thank you.
Dr. Perez?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank our educators. I was at our open house or I can't remember, back to school night, and going through the whole schedule with my daughter, and every classroom, they were very like, you can park it here or you can leave it at home. Like they were explaining every time. And like Melissa, I had the same experience as a parent, just super like welcoming to the kids, but then setting the standard. And I am speaking to like my kid and I as a parent had to learn, like, I can't text my kid. Like I had to go pick her up and I'm like, I told her now, like, I will call the school and they will get you when I get there. So it's just like that relearning, but super thankful to the educators that are trying, working to implement this in our buildings.
Director Raji?
Thank you. Yeah, that kind of touched on the one thing I thought I wanted to check in. It was sort of emergency communication for parents and, which, especially with older kids, where you may have been used to being able just to send a text and know, and at least think that they've seen it. Where in this context they wouldn't, and as in the before times when someone would have to call the office and then would come to you as a student. So has there been any, or is there any just like additional just kind of feedback to parents who may, or has there been any, I mean, it's early in the year, but just communication around like those, what to do. Something's happened, someone's got to pick somebody up different, something's happened, and that there's staffing and also like process messaging. So folks like, know what to do or remember that this was a thing that you could do. Is call the admin office and let this message be delivered to your child.
There we go. Yeah, great question. And yes, we're having to use a lot more TAs, that's for sure, at the high school to sort of run those messages to kids. But parents, by and large, are following that direction and are calling the main office to try and get messages or have their kid, picked up or whatever the case may be. And you're right, like in the before times, we all had to do that. It does increase some of the phone traffic to the office. But I think all schools are finding ways of how to make that more efficient. Might be a Google Doc that is then distributed so that teachers know that a kid needs to be released. And that's part of what we're going to talk about tomorrow in our principal meeting, particularly at the high school, is what have you learned in these first 3 weeks to make this more efficient and helpful for parents and for kids, because things happen and we know that, and we want to make sure that those messages are being delivered and sent to the kids from the parents, and vice versa sometimes too.
Anybody else have any questions? Dr. Perez?
I just had a funny, because my daughter, I was like, I have to pick you up, and she said, Mom, do not call me. And tell Abuela not to call me or text me because I will get in trouble. So she was like the one correcting me, going, okay. I'm like, I remember. And now I've had to like create this complex schedule, who's picking up who, where, at what time, and, so that everybody in the whole entire family knows. And so it's been back to that learning experience.
Oh, my side comment was our grandma has also gotten in trouble for texting middle of the school day, so it's not just the parents.
Well, anybody else? I want to thank you for presenting, in a short notice and giving us the updates. I just have one question. I know that the main focus of this policy is to keep kids focused in their studies so that they won't be, distracted. And the other one is to get the cyberbullying down. And I know that student survey that goes out every year does check on bullying. Have you noticed in last year that the cyberbullying, did it go down?
We can run those numbers. And I know we've talked about some of the cyberbullying and bullying in general. I think anecdotally, we found that bullying did decrease in terms of what was reported. Now, we don't always know, not everything's reported, so our reporting mechanism is through Synergy, and that's how we would know exactly what those numbers are. But as we've discussed, sometimes kids don't report it, or they might report it on the survey, but it's not reported to an adult to be acted upon. But I think anecdotally, what we found is that there was less conflict in general, in particular at the high school last year, where the biggest change occurred with Packet or Parkit. We found that there were less fights, for sure. There was less of that sort of aggressive bullying that can happen face-to-face sometimes because they weren't interacting, at least at school, online. We couldn't control what happened outside of school, but because that wasn't allowed at school, I think we saw a decrease anecdotally.
I would like to see those numbers out, if it's possible, because I think cyberbullying, isn't that measured 2 out of the 3? There's on bus, in school, and online. So if we can get those numbers, that would, be very helpful and encourage parents and the students to make sure that their kids follow it. Thank you. Dr. Carpenter?
That you made me think of something, Chair Garg. I remember when we first started having these conversations, one of the very interesting, speaking of bullying and fights, actually, was that I came to understand that phones were used to stage fights, or not stage, but like, hey, we're going to meet in the bathroom. These 2 girls are going to fight, or whatever it is. And I don't know if we had those numbers captured in a way that we can look at those in with the new environment. Like, yes, we were having fights, and I don't know if you have this granular data, but fights maybe is the most granular you're going to get. But like, does the number of fights go down because the ability to organize, secretly and have that play out is lessened without the ability to have phone bell to bell?
Thank you.
Yes. I would say, I agree with you that I think it would be important to look at those numbers, and I think fights, that code specifically would be an interesting study. I will share that anecdotally, one of the middle schools that I support called me at the end of November and said, Robin, we've had a fight, and this is the first fight of the year. So, and that was highly unusual compared to the numbers beforehand. So it was really huge.
I would love to see those numbers so we can celebrate them and bring them to skeptics look, this is, it's hard to argue about reducing the number of fights and the amount of bullying. And again, I don't know how much buy-in we still need from the community, from families, from teachers. Maybe not any, but it makes me feel better to support this and maybe even go back to our lawmakers and say, actually, this is working out for us. So I'm always happy to have data to help me make decisions. So if you're able to do that, that would be great. Thank you.
In the old days, you used to pass notes and talk between passing periods, what's going to happen, sorry. Just different, right, in the old days. But I think what the team did a year prior was prepping the whole community in terms of what we're going to do. When I'm hearing across the state from superintendents, this is not going great. This implementation is not going great in a lot of districts because of it's new and it's quick. It was literally done very quickly. So I'm hearing that some districts are even doing pack and go lunches at lunchtime because kids are leaving campus without eating to get on their cell phones in some districts. So I just appreciate the wherewithal and just being preemptive as a staff in terms of getting this off and running. So I think we're in better shape. I mean, we still have some ways to go with some areas, but I think we're ahead of the curve compared to many other districts. So thank you to the staff.
Dr. Tron?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for all the forethoughts of pre-implementation last year. That helps a lot. I also just wanted to share a story about my grandsons who actually are in middle school, 8th graders, and their parents do not believe in cell phones, so they never own a cell phone. But after a car accident, they have smart watches. So some smartwatches, you can text and you can do other things. So now it's not also, it's part of those personal devices. And when I asked them about how does it feel, and they said that, well, it's kind of weird because I don't know what's going on in the school because they usually have this group chat between the students. And they was like, see what's going on. And I think but now they're getting used to it. And I also talked to a couple high school students, and they said that there's many ways the kids could go around that. So like, for example, it doesn't happen in our district because we actually let the kids have it on them, but on buildings or schools who ask them to put and lock it up, a lot of kids also bought those, what do you call those? Yeah, burners. Yes, thank you. And just put it into the bag and zip it up. So there's many ways that kids can go around the policy if they want to, but just getting the data that the director is asking will be great for knowing the bully incident increasing and how does it help the students. That will be very useful for us. But I also know that we also have a lot of other data as we need to collect as well. So thank you.
Dr. Carpenter?
I feel like we have the luxury of time. So I'm really glad we didn't spend money on those pouches. I mean, kids will find their way around them. And I guess a curiosity is like, how would our compliance data compare to a school that did have pouches? Like, again, like maybe we're making a mistake. Maybe we do need that. Like, it'd be nice to, again, more data. Like, I think PPS is using pouches, so it'd be interesting to hear. I could be wrong. What their experience is versus us, and I think it sounds like it's going well so far, and it gives kids a little bit more sense of autonomy. But maybe it's not the right thing to be doing. So again, more data would be helpful.
I appreciate that. And one of the things that our team did last year was go out and interview different schools who had started their own implementation processes. Some of them were using manila envelopes, a little bit less expensive than the pouch. Some of them were using the pouch. And sometimes within the same district, one school was having great success with a pouch or an envelope or just put it away. And within the same district, another school was struggling with it. So part of our conversation when we came back and triangulated what was happening from the different schools that we had interviewed their school leaders and teachers, culture. It was the school culture it came down to within one district where there's high implementation and low conflict versus high conflict and low implementation. School culture, having staff that are part of the communication, having staff that are a part of how are we norming and coming together. That comment that I made earlier, when you see staff welcoming kids coming in the door, oh, hey, Shelley, nice to see you. Oh, I see your phone. Let's go ahead and park that. Go ahead and pack that. What is the school culture around that? So that was part of our implementation in the way that our teams rolled out the communication to all of our school executives, our principal supervisors, and all of our principals. Part of the communication was building that school culture of welcome, connection, over compliance. That was the structure, and I think that was incredibly helpful.
Yeah, and I would just add, one thing to consider around some of our surrounding districts is a lot of our districts have open campus at lunch. And so your 11th and 12th graders they're off campus. And so those districts aren't having to manage their older kids in particular at lunch. Whereas for us, 9, 12, all of our kids are at lunch, which is good. It's safe, keeps kids safe. Complicates how we support those kids at lunch because they're required to be on campus for us. So when we look at some of our surrounding districts and their success or, sometimes lack thereof, we also have to consider the differences in culture. And one of those big culture pieces at high school is whether you can leave or not. So.
Is the implementation, because there are so many differences, one school may implement it differently. Is there a consistency in schools, how they implement, like how the kids are, I don't want to call it discipline, but it is disciplining them, like if they use it when they're not supposed to, how that is handled? Is it same in all the schools? Do the principals know what our norms are? Like, for instance, if a kid goes to their car during lunch and use it, but they're still in the property, what type of, is that passed down in all the schools, all the principals, all the administrators? Do they know how to handle that?
This is kind of
Sorry.
it's a bigger answer than just that. It's really discipline calibration in general. And we actually had a really strong group of assistant principals meet last year, and they created a behavior support grid to really not just have consistency within a building, but across buildings as well. And so they now have that grid that doesn't just cover technology misuse or cell phone use, but also covers all of the other things so that we can be more consistent in our practices across our buildings. And our next step is to work with our middle school assistant principals to do the same so that we're calibrated 6-12 in particular.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Well, thank you, all of you, for the presentation. Do you have anything you want to add?
No, but we'll keep you updated. I take a lot of notes during these meetings, and we always calibrate back in terms of our notes as a staff, and we have a lot of notes regarding what data points possibly we can bring back to the board. So looking forward to end of the year discussion as well.
Okay, thank you. So, well, with that, the September 9, 2025 work session of Beaverton School Board is adjourned at 6.